Fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today for this SCGE Meet the Expert session. We are really happy and honored to have this discussion with Jessica Chaikof, Rachel Chaikof, and Stacey Ashlund, um, really to help us understand the patient experience and journey in working with gene therapy programs as well as with the healthcare system here in the US. So I'm going to lead the discussion. I'm Chris Saha from the University of Wisconsin, and I lead one of um, the teams on gene editing the eye here in Wisconsin as part of the SCGE. And I think we'll just get started here with a kind of a introduction from each of our panelists to kind of share a brief explanation of their journey as well. So we'll start, I think, with Jessica, if that's okay. Just could you tell us briefly about your journey from diagnosis to where you are today?
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Chaikof. I am from Massachusetts. So I'm living with Usher syndrome type 1F. I was diagnosed when I was 11 years old in 2006. My sister can share more about it, but we were at an annual, what was supposed to be a routine doctor's appointment when we started noticing some issues with my sister's eye. And I remember that was the day a lot of things changed my family. And at that time, I was 11 years old and didn't really understand what was going on. And my parents didn't want to scare me, so they didn't exactly tell me what I had. And eventually they did say to me, you have something that makes it difficult for you to see at night. But they didn't give me the name of the condition because they're really afraid of me going and looking up on Google and scaring myself. And so I am now in a PhD program in this social policy program at the Howard School of Brandeis University. I'm in my 5th year working on my dissertation, hoping to be finished about a year and a half. What was really critical in the support that I got in the early years of the disease that I wish I had more of was it was really incredible for me to meet other people with Usher syndrome who were my age. And so it was really critical for me growing up when I was in high school and college was meeting all these other young adults at the Usher conferences. And I wish I had more of that support in middle school, but I didn't start to see that because I was older. But now what really drives me is seeing the work that's being done for treatments.
Thank Jessica. We'll look and probe a little bit more about what type of support could be helpful as well. And I think you anticipated my question about what additional information or support you wish had been available earlier. So Rachel, do you want to add to this story and give your own perspective here?
Sure. I was 19 years old in 2006 when I was diagnosed with Usher. Whenever I was 1 month from starting my first year at an art college, I had just graduated from high school with honors, and I thought I have overcome all of my obstacles of growing up with deafness. I was born deaf and received a cochlear implant at age 2 years old in 1989 when it was not yet approved by the FDA. And so receiving the diagnosis felt like another big blow with a huge mountain coming up and having to climb over it again. But I continued to go into the art school, majored in photography, graduated summa cum laude in photography, and then I went on to get a master's in anthropology in London. And then eventually I joined the Peace Corps, serving in Cameroon, West Africa, focusing on community health education, where I met my husband, who's been my husband for almost 8 years now. And um, and then I continued to work in global health and international development for 10 years. And I'm now currently pursuing Master of Public Health at Johns Hopkins. Um, for me, as someone living with Usher 1F, I continue to live my life with fullest, with hope that I will eventually see gene therapy to halt the progression of blindness and restore the vision I have lost so far. My biggest challenges today are seeing at night and also not being able to drive. And so I have to rely on public transportation and also Uber's, taxi, and my husband to get to places.
Thank you, Rachel. And I'll pass it on to Stacey here to give another perspective.
Yeah, I'm the parent perspective. So my son, Brendan, he's 27 now, and shortly after birth, he was diagnosed as profoundly deaf. And at the time, they said we're going to rule out the other associated syndromes that could come with deafness. And one of them was to have a pediatric ophthalmologist look in his eyes who, quote unquote, ruled out Usher and said he's not going to go blind. So, of course, this was a pediatric ophthalmologist that had never seen Usher, or maybe probably even retinitis pigmentosa before. So obviously that was incorrect. When Brendan was about 6 to 9 months old and he wasn't like crawling yet, they said, you know, this is probably Usher's, go to a geneticist. And then the geneticist basically said, it's Usher 1F, but we're just saying that based on what we see, the collection of symptoms, right? That is motor delayed, the profound deafness, and that we're saying it's Usher 1F. And we said, well, how do we know for sure? And they said, well, it is. And the only way to know for sure, they said, was the vestibular test, which I couldn't find anybody who would do that on a baby, that put you in a chair in the dark room and spin you, or the ERG, electroretinogram. And we were strongly discouraged not to do the ERG on it because the test was considered awful. But over and over again, they said, there's nothing you can do anyway, so you don't need to have this confirmed. But for us, we needed to know. So we spoke to the doctor at Stanford who does the ERG, and he said, oh, it's not that bad. And we did put him in a dark room for 30 minutes with the contact lenses and the wires, and we all cried throughout the whole test. And the doctor came out afterwards and said, I'm surprised he can see it all. He got a flat line response. So that was our confirmation of Usher 1F. But obviously he could still see. Brennan was 22 months old at that time. So fast forward, there was no blood test until Brennan was like, I don't know, 9-ish, I think. And through the Usher Coalition, even though we live next to Stanford, which is a premier research university, the only way I knew that there was a blood test available was through the Usher Coalition. We had the blood drawn at Stanford and sent to Harvard, and they confirmed Usher 1F and gave us the subtype. So Brendan, he could only, if he would drop a Lego, he couldn't find it. So if it went out of his peripheral vision and you can't hear which direction it's going, we knew that there was something. If he was looking on a bookshelf, unless the book he was looking for was right in front of him, he couldn't find it if it was above or below. So we kind of knew, and then the night vision stuff, natural progression, we saw more of that as he got older. They did say he was legally blind when he was 18, but he was still functioning pretty well. Now he's 27, and in my opinion, he absolutely does function like somebody who's legally blind. He's got less than 10%, but he doesn't identify as blind. So he refuses to use a cane or a guide dog or anything that would, call him out. So basically we were told, you don't need to know because there's nothing you can do anyway. And now that you do know, there's still nothing you can do. But because of Usher Coalition and connecting with other families, that's how kind of we started this journey on what can we do.
Thank you. I think in terms of a common theme that we also hear in the patient groups that we engage in is the diagnostic process and journey, and how variable it can be as well. So I want to kind of walk through today kind of the different steps over time in this journey. So diagnosis, participating or not in various trials, and then kind of the future. So I'll just start here at the beginning, perhaps for the Jessica and Rachel. to get a sense of how your understanding of disease has changed as you've gotten older. So from the initial diagnosis or even before that, have you thought about your disease differently? And I would want for each of you to discuss or just define the disease, because not everyone here is an expert in Usher or any particular sensory disorder.
I can go. So when I was first diagnosed, I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be blind overnight. What am I going to do? But then after quickly learning from speaking with other families with children with Usher 1F, Usher syndrome in general, that I would not go blind overnight, and that was a gradual progression, and that there were a lot of potential for treatments in the future to restore the vision. I continued to go on with my life, continuing to pursue art and to travel and do things I've always enjoyed as if I wasn't diagnosed prior. One thing that changed though is the ability to drive. I was driving everywhere, including on highways when I was first diagnosed, and eventually I limited my driving then completely to no driving. But one thing that did change my perspective throughout this journey in the last 2 decades is that I have seen that unfortunately money and also advocacy dictates the speed of the research and development of cures. And so at first I thought I could sit back and let the medical and science community do their work to develop the treatment and cure. And when I was seeing for other types of Usher syndrome, being much more advanced in the development of treatments, I realized it was because of money and the advocacy to create awareness and to encourage more researchers to be involved. And that is what pushed and led to my parents starting the foundation to accelerate the research and development of gene therapy for Usher 1F. And since the founding of the foundation, I have noticed a tremendous advancement that really has changed the course of the development of treatment, has enabled us to expand the number of research labs to develop the treatments. So all in all, what I want to say is that it really does truly take for parents and families and advocates to really move the mountains to make the development of cures to happen.
So I'm just going to add on to that. So I do want to briefly define Usher syndrome in case anyone's not expert. So Usher syndrome is a rare genetic disorder that causes progressive vision loss, hearing loss, and vestibular issues, and night blindness. So my understanding of disease is in many cases very different than Rachel. So I didn't even know the name of what it was as a child, because my parents were afraid I was going to go on Google and scare myself out of it. Eventually, I did learn the name and start to understand what it meant, and I continued to live my life, doing what I wanted, though I will admit some things have changed because of the disease. I, unlike my sister, never had a chance to learn how to drive or take driver's ed, which was very difficult for me to accept, especially when I was in high school and I'll see my classmates post on Facebook or in the mornings next to my walker show off their licenses and learner's permits. And that was very difficult for me because that also limited my ability where I could live, where I could go as an adult. So for instance, when I was applying for PhD programs, I got into my dream program. It was my first choice. I was so excited to go. But the issue I faced with this program was I was in the middle of nowhere with not a very good public transportation system. It was only a bus. And on top of that, I couldn't rely on Uber and Lyft because at that time I had a service dog. And getting Uber and Lyft with a service dog in many cases can be very stressful. I've dealt with drivers refusing me or being nasty, and so dealing with that stress. And so because the ushers, I had to turn down my offer. And that was really difficult for me to accept, in many cases, very devastating, because I felt like, while I'm still a very good PhD program and I've done very well, I felt like this decision was made very much so in the usher terms, because I was limited in what I could do despite everything I've done, with my life, had a successful academic career. It's been very difficult. And so I'll let Stacey go, and then I'll answer the next question I see in the chats.
Let's see. Our understanding, thank you, Jessica, for going back a little. I didn't realize that all the researchers weren't 100% familiar with Usher type 1. But yeah, like Jessica said, at first we had the deafness diagnosis and we thought that was shattering. How will he hear and speak? But we got the cochlear implant. Brendan was on his first birthday, got his first implant. And then about 5 years later, got the second ear implanted. And now, of course, they're implanting both babies even younger than age 1. But we kind of dealt with one hurdle at a time, which was first was, hearing and speaking and walking. And we actually did tell Brendan about his Usher diagnosis when he was around 11-ish, because at the time, we obviously knew he had hearing difficulties, vision impairment, motor balance impairment, as well as some social challenges. And it's hard to say whether the social challenges are because of the hearing and the vision and everything else, or in addition. But we did tell him, because the vision specialists, low vision specialists in our school district, we were like, well, we can start him with cane and braille, but only if you tell him. We can't say, here, let's learn this without you guys telling him. We were just like Jessica's parents, and completely afraid to tell him this terrible news that we thought was shattering. So when he was around 11-ish, my husband took him out, and they were walking around and said, he's like, we're going to go downtown for lunch. And they were walking, and he says, okay, so you're going to go blind when you're an adult, like maybe like when, I think he said something like 30. And my son said, okay, what's for lunch? Because at age 11, 30 sounds, this is way too far away. So it didn't really hit him until he was about 14 and he started high school. And that is the age where he could just see how the other kids were succeeding in ways that he couldn't. And they were competing in sports, and they were auditioning and getting the lead in the plays, and just taking the lead in all these roles. And he really emotionally took a hit when he started high school at 14. And he's always been a science-minded kid, a STEM-minded kid, always loved science. And so you would say things like, I'm a genetic mutation. I should never have been born, which was really, really hard for us as parents, of course, to hear. By the time he found friends in a social group, then he got happier again, and did go to undergrad, studied biomedical and molecular biochemistry and molecular bio, I think was his undergrad. He did a 2-year fellowship at the NIH, planning to go into retinal research. Started a PhD program at the University of Iowa, and where you rotate through 3 different vision labs, but he did not find a fit where he fit with them and they fit with him. So then he went to the research lab was doing stem cells for lung disease, I believe it was. But after 2 years, he and they mutually decided he didn't want to stay on the PhD path. So took his master's degree, moved home, and just recently started a job down in San Diego as a research lab assistant. And don't ask me what they do, because there's flow cytometers, and that's all I really know what he does day to day. But for him, it's been really, really frustrating because, when he was a teenager, he was like, and his vision was worse younger than I would say Rachel's was, because Brendan never was able to learn to drive, even riding a bike when he was like 12 to 14. We quickly realized, he could go straight on a bike as long as nobody was around. But other than that, he would veer into other bikes, and that wouldn't work. So he never was able to drive. And that is Brendan's main thing. If he could fix one thing, he would want the ability to drive. Right now he's living in San Diego. Bus transportation is very minimal.
Yeah, well, thank you, Stacey, and Jessica and Rachel. High school and teenage years are certainly stressful enough, without, I think, these other dimensions. I'm gonna invite Marcia, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question. Otherwise, I could.
Sure, I'm happy to. I'm so appreciative of the three of you for telling your story. It's just really, really interesting and compelling. And even for two sisters, how different, your stories can be. Um, and since, we're here talking about, all of us come together around gene therapy and gene editing, I was very interested to learn if you were thinking about, and it sounds like maybe you all are thinking about possible trials for gene therapy and gene editing, what you would see as the possible pros and cons of that for you or for Stacey, for your son, and what a meaningful outcome of a trial would be like. What would success look like for you out of a trial like that? Because I think it's hard sometimes to think about, we would love to wave a magic wand, but when it comes to the realistic outcomes of a trial, what would be acceptable? What would be exciting? What would be your ideal?
Marcia, would you mind introducing yourself to the
I'm
group?
so sorry. Yes, my name's Marcia Mickey. I'm at Case Western Reserve University, and I'm a bioethicist. So I do a lot of research with patients and patient advocates and parents around things like this. And so these are the kinds of questions that I'm asking folks with other conditions and from other patient communities. But I haven't done any work with your community, so I'd just be very interested to learn what you think about that.
So, Marcia, thank you for your question. I really appreciate it. So, really, for me, the clinical trial or gene therapy, I see more pros than cons. I see a chance at somebody who's willing to make a leap in tackling the condition that affects me. And I see as a chance, getting a cure. The only con I see really is there is always a risk. And you have to be willing to take that risk. And that's something I will literally do no matter what anyone tells me. For me, what a successful, meaningful outcome would be to be able to finally have a chance to sign up for a driver's ed. And I know that sounds minor, and I joke to my boyfriend all the time about how I'll probably be the only late 30-year-old or 40-year-old in a driver's ed class. But one of the challenges my partner and I face is trying to figure out where we want to live. And one of the challenges is we live in the Boston area, which is not a very affordable area. And so one of the cases we're trying to figure out is, okay, where can we live? And so for me, a meaningful outcome would be to be able for someone to say to me, yes, you can finally sign up for that driver's ed. Because that's just something I feel like I missed out so much of being a teenager. And even though I still have my vision, I was like to my parents, why can't I just sign up for and just sit in the class, and just learn with my friends and peers? But at that time, we just didn't think it was a good idea. And so for me, that'd be the most meaningful outcome for someone to say to me, you can go learn how to drive. As minor as that sounds, because that would just open up so many doors and just give me a breath of relief as I'm working to finish my PhD and look at jobs and postdocs where I could go.
I don't think that sounds minor at all. I mean, we're a very car-centric society here in the US, and that's a very, very concrete outcome that's completely reasonable when I think about, I live in Cleveland, public transport is here as well. So like I can totally see that as an outcome that would be really meaningful. Sorry, I interrupted whoever was going to go next.
Yeah, I would love to add. So I participated in two clinical trials in my life. First, the cochlear implant when it was not yet approved by the FDA for children at the time. Um, my parents were given very low expectation, which was that I would be able to hear at the most environmental sounds. And my parents felt it was worth taking the risk because I was 100% deaf. And so there was nothing for me to lose. And the safety has already been proven because the cochlear implants at the time had been FDA approved for adults. Um, but receiving cochlear implant has far surpassed anyone's expectation, including professionals, in that I am able to understand speech without lip reading and be able to communicate on the phone with ease. And then I participated in a clinical trial for NAC, a drug that has the potential to halt the progression of blindness. And so I did that a few years ago. And they are currently in phase 3 clinical trials. So they're still waiting on that. And I should note I was in the phase 1 clinical trial, which was testing both safety and efficacy. And for me, when it comes to deciding to participate on clinical trials, be two things. One is that if I can trust that there's a reasonable amount of safety. I mean, I understand there's risk, but I want to be assured that there's a low risk of causing death or any adverse effects. And I would want to see data from the testing done on animals, etc., to assess that. And then the second thing is it really has to provide tremendous improved vision. And what I mean by that is not, I want to be able to regain the ability to drive. And it's important to know there's a lot of talks, people saying, oh, there's now self-driving cars like Waymo. You could potentially purchase a self-driving car one day. And my answer is no, I don't want to just get a self-driving car to take me around. I want to be able to drive again because if I'm able to drive again, it means that I can also see stars at night because the ability to see stars at night is usually one of the first things that goes. And I want to be able to see the stars, see the color of the world. I don't want my world to be black and white. And so that's why I want not just to halt the progression of blindness, but also the full restoration of the vision.
Easy.
Yeah, I was going to just climb onto that as well. I would say my understanding of gene editing and gene therapy, well, a big part of it came from reading the book Forever Fix. Assuming you guys are familiar with that. It's like the case for gene therapy or something. Really gave me a lot of understanding about what a phase 1 is versus a phase 2 clinical trial, and that a phase 1 is for safety, and phase 2 is where they start to test efficacy, if I understand it correctly. I wouldn't say it scared me. I would say the book educated me about the long haul process it is to actually get to efficacy in a clinical trial. And on humans, obviously animals first, but humans as well. So, if it were up to me, I would say I would never do a phase 1 clinical trial. My son is a very strong, independent, self-minded young man, and he will make his own decisions. I have raised him too well to make his own opinion, so I can't say what he should or shouldn't do. He will do what he wants to do or not do. I would say, in addition to what the girls have said about driving is in mobility in general, but the impact of a multisensory loss is so it's not just mobility, which is obviously a big thing, driving in particular, but it's also job opportunities and social opportunities. So if a person is just legally blind, but they have perfect hearing, they can say, oh, the conversation's coming from over here, I'll turn my attention this way. But with bilateral cochlear implants received at different times, he can't localize and tell which direction a sound is clearly coming from. So he doesn't know where to turn his attention. So job opportunities he's finding unlimited. If this job, if he does 1 year on this job or 6 months on this job and find that he's really having too much of a difficulty time in a lab, reading test tubes and pipetting and all the things that he's doing, one of the things that he has as a possible is that he might go back and get a second master's in bioinformatics so that he can be doing computer work. I mean, he loves wet lab work and he really wants to stay in the wet lab. But, we, his parents, worry that may not be possible. And he's going to do it until if it becomes a point that he can't, then when he will come to that decision, not us. So his job opportunities would open up. I mean, it's most accessible if you're sitting in front of a computer, but he would really love to be continuing in wet lab work. Social opportunities are hard as well. He cannot go to a loud, crowded bar, dark. He just cannot. Those are the things that would really open up if there was a treatment or a cure for his vision. And like the girls have said, what Brendan wants, it's hard for me to say what do I want versus what Brendan wants, but it's basically the same thing. Is he wants to regain, not just retain the vision he has. He wants to regain and restore what he's lost, if that's ever going to be possible. And I was going to say one other thing, and I forgot what it was. So
That's all right. That was really illuminating. I think one of the issues we have in our community is the idea of preservation versus rescue and the magnitude of benefit. And so I was curious for all of you how you came to understand the potential benefits of these types of trials. I think, Rachel, you mentioned uh, engaging with peers and patient advocates, and all of you have parents. So how did this process happen? And do you have it sounds like you have a strong view about trying to rescue over preservation, but maybe you could say more there.
Yeah. So I can say, which I neglected to share from my experience with clinical trial, the con is that clinical trial is a tremendous amount of work, not just for the researchers and the doctors and nurses who are administering them, but also the patients. And so, for example, when I was participating in that clinical trial, which I chose to participate in because my feeling was that while the development of gene therapies in progress to restore the vision I've lost so far, at least I can try to halt the progression of blindness for now. So that's what motivated me to join the trial. But the amount of work for the patient is tremendous. I had to attend the clinical trial site at Johns Hopkins every 3 months. And it was a good, I would say, 4 to 5 hours worth of testing to track the progress of my vision, and it involved doing various tests on my eyes, such as the visual field and a lot of flashings in my eyes, and also a lot of like eye drops. And it's a very exhausting day. And then in the between each 3 months, I would have to keep a journal, a log of what time I took the medicine, how many pills, and also make any note if I saw any changes, if I had any concerns. So clinical trial is work, but if it's going to provide me a great potential of improving the vision and regaining what I had lost, then it's truly worth participating in it.
Anything to add, Stacey or Jessica?
I was going to add that what the only part of this process that Brendan has participated in so far is the Rush 1F natural history study that just completed after 4 years, which is basically, instead of just Brendan going for his annual ophthalmology exam, it was like an annual exam that was like twice as long. And that's just to track the natural progression of the disorder, right? So, but Brendan was very eager to participate in that and very proud to be able to participate in that. And he is coming to the point of, I may not just be here to help myself, I may also, or in addition, be here to help others who are younger than me, who are coming along behind me, who haven't yet lost this much vision. So he's very much aware of that and eager to help others just as much. You know what I'm saying? Is it's kind of a gradual process of coming to acceptance of what you have, what you've lost, and what you will regain. When he was younger, he would continually say, I will drive. I will not give up. I will drive. They will fix this. Right. And now he did take Waymo for 6 months when he was back home in Palo Alto, and he was really happy that was the closest he ever came to freedom, right? Not have to have a mom and not have to have anybody or even a generic driver drive him, but to have the, autonomy of saying, I'm getting in the car, I can put down the windows, I can blast my music, and I can go. That was the closest he came. But I think we're all very aware of the risks versus benefits. If and when something does come along, I might be more risk averse than Brendan. I don't know that. I mean, we would need to look at the details very carefully in particular to understand what the risks are versus the benefits. And it might be treating one eye versus treating another. And we understand that it's a really, really slow process. So I don't, have I don't know if you guys are familiar with Rebecca Alexander, but she's got a different type of usher. I think she's got 3A or something like that. But she talks a lot about, she's probably in her mid 40s now, but she talks about being told from age 12 or something that the cure for blindness was just around the corner. And, she's now a psychotherapist in New York City. And she's like, it is not about waiting for a cure. It's about being, comfortable with who you are, where you are, and, finding your peace, right? Or your happiness or whatever, right where you are. So she's very much in the acceptance point rather than the hope, holding on hope for a cure that she's been told for her whole life that it's just around the corner. And now she's like, I'm not waiting. I'm living my life, the way it is right now. Whereas I'd say Brendan is kind of on that cautious precipice in between of, accepting versus hope. Whether something will come along, but because he's very, very science minded, he and my husband, who's also a geek, would very carefully look at the details of the risks versus the benefits. And but I do think even if it's something very small that it would regain, any step in progress is good progress. Because what we don't, want is, as opposed to the ophthalmologist who first diagnosed him with Usher when he was 22 months old, who said, like, there's no hope, there's nothing anybody can ever do, go away, move on, it's over. You want hope, but you don't want false hope, right? Progress is more what we consider useful, right? It's not like a cure, but it's a step along that. And it's hard for me to explain to my friends and family who donate and, to our foundation and everything. But even though there's not like a cure or even a treatment available right now, or even a clinical trial happening right this second, the fact that we know the gene, the mutation, there's a lot of progress. Like, there wasn't even a blood test till Brennan was like 9 or 10 years old, right? And I think at the time that the Chaikof started the foundation, I think we had maybe 29 families worldwide identified with 1F. Back then, we thought it was the Ashkenazi Jewish mutation. And now I don't know how many we have, but at least double that. But people want to know things like, how rare is it? Right. And I'm like, I can't tell you that, because there's going to be a lot of deafblind people out there in the world who are adults who aren't going to a clinic saying, please tell me what type and subtype I have. They're just living their lives. So there's progress, but it's kind of still hard to explain to other people.
I can just add, we have well over 100 families now.
With 1F.
And, thanks to the Rare Genomes Project at Harvard, we do know that there's somewhere between 5,000 to 21,000 worldwide. So ultra rare, regardless.
Awesome. This is really rich stories. I think, Jessica, did you want to add more to this?
No, I absolutely agree, because I think this is one of the things that keeps me get up and out of bed every day. Is so while a lot of people have told me, oh, you need to accept you have this and live your life. And it's not to say I have accepted this, but I also still have a lot of hope. And part of the reason why I feel very privileged to see that is I've seen the work of a foundation that my parents started. Here I am given a whole window from OC to what's happening with the research, getting to know the researchers, and having that as a huge privilege for me, because I can tell that to my friends and family who are donating, saying, I know it's there because I see it. And one of the things I think about is what started all this. In 2012, we went to Usher Syndrome Conference in St. Louis, Missouri. And every single year, they would give this whole round of presentations about each mutation. And my mom would raise her and say, what about 1F? And usually people would say, oh, we'll get back to you. And they never did. So someone got back to her and said, you have no animal model. Without an animal model, no research. And so my mom and my dad, who said, okay, this is ridiculous, let's put our heads together and start this. And so when we started a foundation, the goal was to get an animal model. Now we have not just a zebrafish, we have a mouse model. And that, to me, is huge progress in the research. Because back then, I didn't feel as optimistic, but now I'm seeing how quickly things are moving. And so I know there's something coming, because I'm very privileged to see that. Because when I talk to other people in the Usher community, it's a very different perspective, where they're not as involved. Whereas I and seen as front and center every single day from my parents.
Thank you. Megan, would you mind introducing yourself and asking the question?
Sure. Hi, I'm Megan Elise. I am Marcia's partner in crime at Case Western. And we've done, over the past 5 years, we've talked to a lot of members of communities of rare diseases that may be appropriate sort of therapeutic targets of gene editing. And one of the questions we ask, which I think is a really difficult question, but people have had very different perspectives on it, is, Chris mentioned preservation versus restoration. The third arm is prevention, right? So if you look at baby KJ, right, the idea was to get to him as young as possible so that his phenotype didn't get any stronger. And so he was, hopefully avoiding some of that morbidity. That's one very promising angle. The other is, as Jessica said, we have adults right here, right now, who, also need therapies. How would you balance, prioritizing those two aspects of rescue versus prevention, assuming you were able to allocate resources in any way that you wanted?
So as someone who, like Stacey, has read Forever Fit and also I think it's called Orphan by Philip O'Reilly, which spoke about the innovations of gene therapies and families living with rare diseases, is that we have sort of rare diseases where death is imminent, like the child is going to die early in life. And then we have those like us where death doesn't happen, but our quality of life is greatly impacted. So I think it's a matter of assessing where for cases where death is going to happen, then prevention is what we would want for those patients. Because if we focus on restoration and preservation, then at that point, they may be dead already by the time that happens. Whereas for those where the quality of life is affected and death is not affected, then we would want to focus on restoration.
Can I ask some questions?
Yeah, go ahead. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Zheng Yichen from Mass Eye and Ear, and I, part of SCGE group and study the genetic hearing loss is our program. I have been involved in the clinical trial of recent otoferlin gene therapy that restored hearing in children born with congenital deafness. And so the reason, you all probably know that recently the FDA just approved the first gene therapy drug for genetic hearing loss, which is for otoferlin related genetic hearing loss, DFNB9. And through the involvement of the clinical trial, everything, because we have done all the way from animal study to clinical trial, everything. We learned a great deal during the process. And the one exception with this otoferlin gene therapy is that the result was truly outstanding. It was so much better than we ever envisioned. So it's really on the other side of, so great, too good to be true, that kind of situation. But from our own work, we also realize that's probably the exception rather than general rule. In most of the cases, like many gene therapy, gene editing, like we're working on, most likely we will not get such a great result. We'll get probably marginal, still clinically beneficial, but it will not be like the children completely bone congenital profound deaf till the time after injection within a few months, the hearing can reach almost like a normal level. I think it's very unlikely going forward for majority of the cases. So I always worry about in my mind, how do we manage the expectation? Because we've done this, people always are so excited. I get all the patient calls, the email all the time. But how, from your perspective, and Rachel, Jessica, and Stacey, and how would one, like we're going to, hopefully we'll be able to conduct clinical trial relatively soon, but then how do we manage the expectation, which we probably will not reach the level we have seen?
So I can speak about my experience with clinical trials. So with cochlear implants, my parents were very clearly told by professionals that I would at the most be able to hear environmental sound. They said I would not be able to hear speech. I would not be able to use listening spoken language. The cochlear implants could potentially aid in lip reading. And so that is what sold my parents, is the potential to make lip reading easier. So the expectation were kept low. And so I think it really helped that the professionals made that clear. And it's important that professionals are very clear and upfront about that. And similarly with the not clinical trial, I was explained that it's a clinical trial. This is what we hope for, but it's not expected. And I think also it's important for families to have an understanding of how many uh, drugs start from clinical trial phase 1, make it to FDA approval for marketing. And if I recall correctly, it's only like 36, which is percent, which is very low. And so I think parents need to understand that unlike many other products and goods, where you can just develop and then put it out to the market, when it comes to medicine, not everything is going to go out to the market. And that the benefit of participating in clinical trials, even if it's not a success the first time around, mistakes can be learned, and the knowledge from the mistakes can be used to improve on the next round of development of treatments.
Stacey, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to jump back a little bit about, because the previous somebody asked about how would you prioritize rescue versus prevention, and I was talking to a friend who's known us since our kids were born a little while ago, and I said, you know, when Brennan was born, there was no blood test, there was no gene identification or anything, and now we're actually, you know, closing in on a clinical trial, which is huge. Or fundraising for and walking it through the process to start a clinical trial. And it definitely, and her question was like, oh, great. So they'll be able to fix it in utero. And I was like, no, we can screen to see if both parents are carriers, but we're, as far as I know, nobody's trying to fix Usher in utero. We're trying to focus on people who are already born. But I think, you know, as a parent of a 27-year-old and like the Chaikoffs, you know, here now, of course we want a solution, but second of all, but we also understand, like, if it's too late for us, but we can help the research for, you know, new babies who aren't yet born or recently born, that would be huge also, because I think it's probably easier to retain the vision that you have rather than restore it once it's already gone. The other thing is that when we were going through the cochlear implant process 26 years ago, there was still some debate about should we wait for hair cell regeneration for deafness, or should we just do a cochlear implant, which will preclude the opportunity of being able to do the hair cell regeneration? And the good enough solution was so perfect for us. We wouldn't change a thing. We would do it absolutely again. If somebody would say, you know, have this treatment now for your vision, but it'll preclude, you know, you'll always have to do these drops or wear this device or whatever, we would do it in a heartbeat, because it's that important. It's that difficult to go through life as a legally blind person, that I think we would do it if there was a good enough solution that came along. But you can't really choose, you know, babies versus people now. But if you are going to choose, I think babies win. And I say that as a parent who doesn't want to say that, but I think babies win, because I think there's a better chance of preventing the rod and cone vision deterioration than there is in restoring it once it's already lost, other than the whole prosthetic thing, which I know Stanford is doing some progress on. But I haven't really dove down that path yet into understanding what they're doing with the retinal prosthetics, because I've been kind of on the gene therapy, gene editing camp with the Chaikoffs all along. So
think it's also important to add when it comes to prevention versus preservation and restoration is that there's now prenatal screening where many couples before they conceive a child will go through prenatal genetic screening to see if both couples are carrying the same mutation of a genetic disease. So there is already a tremendous work being done for prevention through prenatal screening because then if both parents carry the same copy of a mutation, then they have the option of either going through in vitro fertilization with preconception screening or going through normal conception and then doing genetic screening while in utero and then deciding to terminate during pregnancy or choosing not to have children at all. And from what I have seen, I think especially with Usher-Bornev, especially among those who are Ashkenazi Jews, we have seen fewer and fewer babies of Ashkenazi Jews who are being born with Usher-Bornev. And that is as a result of the preconception genetic screening. And so in that case, because today I think there's so many more of us who are living the condition than those who are being born today, restoration is really important. And so I think that's another factor to look into.
Thank you. I think we touched on a few potential areas of controversy, but in terms of in utero and as well as use of technology like Waymos to address particular lived experience. But I'm curious about your perspective here on kind of the controversies you're seeing around gene editing or gene therapy for hearing and vision loss, with your peers and as well as families and community that you engage with.
So I can actually,
Go ahead.
sorry.
Yes, go
So I
ahead.
can actually speak to that because I've seen, so I'm very involved, like my sister, very involved in work in the disability community. My research focuses on disability and higher education. And one of my biggest frustrations has been, pretty much since the beginning of this work, and even with cochlear implants, is this frustration from deaf culture and disability community being like, oh, we should ban gene editing or CRISPR completely. We don't need cures, we need rights. And I've seen a lot of that from disability activists. And I get really frustrated with that because I'm like, okay, if you don't want a treatment, that's fine, but don't take that away from someone like me who really wants that treatment. And one of the things I've had to make very clear to people is in no way am I ashamed of my disability. But if I could do something to get it cured, just to live my life and have what I lost, I would do anything. But also, what I often tell people is, and I've had conversations about this with my friends, and we were talking about, like, what would you do if you could prevent your child from having Usher syndrome? And I said to my friend, I'm grateful for what's given me. With or without the disease, I wish I never had it. But if I could prevent my own kid from having it, I would do just that. And so often at times, I often would wish others would say, if you want a treatment and a cure, that's fine. We're not going to stop you. But I just feel very frustrated seeing the many members of the disability community, very well-known disability activists, speak out against CRISPR. And I'm like, this is not attack on you. This is giving opportunities for people who want it. And so I'm going to pass it off to Stacey or Rachel if they want to speak to that, because I've seen a lot of that controversy in my own work with the disability community.
The way I say it to people, those who say, we don't want a fix, we want rights, I say that with my cochlear implants, my parents didn't choose to get me cochlear implants because they wanted to fix me. They chose it because they wanted to give me equal access to listening and spoken language. So in other words, cochlear implant is simply a tool to give me another way of accessing language. And so it's similar with gene editing and gene therapy is that it's simply a tool to give us a choice of accessing the world differently. We can choose to have the option of accessing the world through white cane, Waymo, and other accessibilities of the physical environment, or we can choose to have gene editing, gene therapy, and access the world through a tool that changes how our body functions. And I think it's important that we have options and choices because everyone has different preferences. But the other way I also see is that the two can complement. Both rights and medical treatments can coexist together. We can still have, when gene therapy and gene editing comes out, we can still also at the same time have the rights to ensure that the environment is adjusted for us and that we are free from discrimination and stigma too.
If I can add, I'd say I understand the controversy about gene editing and gene therapy, that it is a fine line. Are we talking eugenics? Are we talking, creating the perfect babies, and that children like ours wouldn't exist if this was prevented? I understand that, but I also understand that no matter what you do, you're never going to be able to prevent all disabilities from occurring, and you're never going to be able to fix all the things that may occur. So it's a yes and. Yes, it's okay to do gene therapy and gene editing and help patients that can benefit from it. And you will still need to provide the accessibility will always be needed, that people who have other disorders or that can't be treated in any way, they will still be entitled to access. And it is a both situation. It's not either or about accessibility versus gene editing and gene therapy.
Thank you, all of you, for sharing that really important set of comments. I'm going to maybe shift the conversation here to something maybe less profound, to insurance and reimbursement. And so, that has come up certainly in terms of how we both develop our therapies and identify various targets. But I also believe it's a big part of the patient experience as well. So could you maybe tell us about your experience working through the US healthcare system, and whether reimbursement and insurance played a factor?
So I
Rachel?
would say the US healthcare system is definitely complex and very expensive. And as someone who grew up with cochlear implants, I had not only, while there is a surgery at the beginning, but then there's also a potential the cochlear implant stop working, and that has happened to me twice in my life. But then there's also speech processor upgrades that come every 3 to 5 years, and it's worth getting new one every 3 to 5 years because it comes with improved quality of hearing. And it is actually important to have health insurance coverage, because without the insurance coverage, it would be basically almost the cost of the average salary of a person. And I have been in a situation where the health insurance has denied my request to get a new sound processor upgrade simply because it was out of network. And the health insurance did not understand that with cochlear implants, once we're implanted the internal device, we have to stay with the same manufacturer for the rest of life. We can't choose other manufacturers for the speech parts of the external part, which I'll share for those who are not familiar with it. So long story short, when I had the denial, I had to go through, I am someone who's not going to say, okay, oh, well, I'm not getting any sound pasta. I am a fighter and I will fight for it. And I would do the same for gene therapy too, which was that I had to go through my employer's HR and say, okay, they need to speak with the insurance managers to address this policy issue and get it approved as in network, because otherwise, if it was out of network, I would not be able for the out-of-pocket cost. And one of the best things I had done is because my employer got the same results I did. Sorry, no, we can't approve you for a network. And so the next step I did is I went straight to the state insurance commissioner and explained the situation and said this should be approved in network for these reasons. And so, and the reason why I did this is because I had the knowledge from other families who went through this experience, and I had the understanding of how the insurance and healthcare system works in the US. And so while in a perfect world, it'd be great to have a single payer healthcare system where everyone has no financial barriers in accessing healthcare. But at the same time, it's important for patients to have an understanding of the process of going through the insurance because that can make all the difference in accessing what we need without financial barriers.
If I can chime in, to me, the whole insurance fight is just it's just the nature of the beast. We've been doing it so long. And my husband works for Apple. This is third time working back for the company, so we're back on United Healthcare, and everybody loves United Healthcare. When he got his first implant, insurance approved it, no problem. 5 years later, when he was getting his second year, and my husband was back at Apple, they denied it, not because he already had one implant. They denied it because, but Apple wouldn't put it in writing and said it was United Healthcare's fault, and United Healthcare wouldn't put it in writing. They said it was Apple's fault because Apple's self-insured. Eventually, we found out that they had a specific exclusion for cochlear implants, and we knew a lawyer who pro bono wrote a letter to Apple saying this is discrimination based on a federally protected class. The only people seeking cochlear implants are profoundly deaf people. So they approved it, but they didn't change their policy. Years later, they eventually did change their policy to not exclude cochlear implants. The Chaikoffs and our family are in the very fortunate group of people who have the resources, the education, and the networks and the wherewithal and the chutzpah basically to fight these things. It's the nature of the beast in this country. I don't see a change anytime soon. Brendan is also right now in the process of getting the external processor upgrade I think this is going to be the 6th external processor upgrade that he's had in his lifetime. And because he's 27 and he had gone off our insurance, but then he came back on our insurance under the disability clause. An adult who's legally blind can come back on our insurance even though he's over age 26. And we started getting the runaround because he's no longer a pediatric patient. His cochlear implant surgeon is no longer in the cochlear implant business and couldn't sign off on it. And we went through, hoop after hoop after hoop of who can sign off and actually do a visit to approve him for this upgrade. I ended up calling one of the ENTs and, because Brendan was just hitting the wall and fit to be tied. He's like, I've talked to 16 different people and nobody will sign off on this and I can't figure out what to do. And I'm busy. I just started my new job. And I called them and they said, we can't talk to you because he's a legal adult. And I said, you don't have to talk to me. You need to listen to me. And I told them the situation and they gave him the virtual appointment and they signed off on his upgrade. But that's because the experience that I have of having been doing this for 27 years, and most families don't have this opportunity and these privileges to be able to fight like we fight. But the Chaikoffs in our family are the kind of families who, hell or high water, whatever needs to be done, if it's insurance approval or whatever, we will make it happen. The Chaikoffs are sort of, Melissa Chaikof and I were online friends through the cochlear implant parents list before the Chaikoffs were even diagnosed with Usher syndrome. So we were already connected and fighting and doing what we needed to do for our kids, just knowing that they were deaf with cochlear implants. And then we joined on the Usher bandwagon as well. But we are the families who would do it, and not everybody has that privilege.
Yeah, I have a specific follow-up to Rachel. You mentioned being involved in a trial or a few trials. Was that covered by insurance, or were there challenges with your insurance coverage during those trials?
So for the cochlear implant clinical trial, that was covered by the health insurance. For the NAC drug clinical trial, that did not need health insurance. That was partly funded through, if I recall correctly, Foundation Fighting Blindness. and NIH, but the bottom line is they had funding from other sources to be able to cover the clinical trial without the need of health insurance.
Sounds like the fight wasn't really in that portion of the experience, right?
I
That's
can
good to
add to
hear.
that though, because Rachel was only 2.5 when it happened. So we kind of sneaked her implant through insurance. They didn't question it. And then as she mentioned, she was part of the clinical trials. It was right after her that our insurance at the time said, wait a minute, we're not going to cover this. And so then I became part of an advocacy group that went to Capitol Hill to say, you've got to mandate coverage for cochlear implants for children. And eventually the insurance did reverse it. But there were others who came after us who weren't as fortunate as we were.
And I also want to add to that, that's also one of the big things, that's a big, huge concern in clinical trials. So for the Rush 1F's natural history study, that's all been covered by Foundation Fighting Blindness. But one of the reasons why clinical trials are so expensive, in conversations I've had with my mom, is you got to cover all the other reimbursement costs to get people to participate. And so with clinical trials, you're not just looking at the cost of a drug or a whole medical team. You're also looking at getting the people into the area. You're looking at covering all these other costs because I suspect insurance may not cover that. And that's one of the fears I have. So I've been with my partner for about 3 years and we've talked about getting married. But one of my concerns I have is I'm stable to stay on my parents' health insurance, and it's been the best insurance I've ever had in my life. And if I get married, I have to go off it. And that has been one of my biggest fears is going off my parents' health insurance. So that's what I'll just add in briefly.
Yeah, that's really
Clarify with Jessica, I think what she's talking about is travel expenses. It's because clinical trials often happen only in limited number of hospitals in the country. So that requires traveling not only by car, but plane or train and overnight stays. And those are expenses that are not covered by the health insurance that needs to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, really good point. What I think one of the trends in our field is to do really innovative first in human trials outside the US for the first dosing. Is that something you have concerns about or have heard about in your community? Could you just share some of your thoughts on that?
So I would be absolutely open to doing clinical trial out of the country, but I would need to first look at is what does the regulations look like? Do they have the same level of high standards of regulations like FDA in the US? And what preclinical work had they done? What study had they done? Had they done the testing on animals? What was the results of it? That's something I would have to first look at. Um, and secondly, the second consideration is unfortunately financial because the cost of traveling to another country is great. So it could end up being the same price or even less because healthcare is often cheaper in other countries than the US. Um, but that I would say at the end of the day, it's still going to be a barrier for all families. The travel cost can be a prohibitive factor. Um, and so there would definitely be a need for funding support.
Stacey, would you like to add anything from the parent perspective?
Yeah, no, I agree. Looking at the safety and the other factors, I mean, there's a lot of questions if you do something outside of the US, is it just Canada or, how far out of the US is it? And also, like I don't know things like how long after would you have to stay there, how many times would you have to come back, all those other factors. But basically my family is like, if there's something and we think it's safe and we need to make this happen outside of the country, we would do it.
And it sounds like if in your community, this is not a common occurrence that you hear of families or patients going abroad.
I hear people going abroad all the time, but they're usually for things that are very elective and they just want them to be done cheaper. Nothing that is as life-changing as this would be.
Right.
Well, and I will add, we're working with a consultant to bring our gene therapy to clinical trial, and she mentioned the possibility of Australia. And I'm like, well, we have one known patient in Australia. How practical is it going to be to get all of our patients from US, Canada, and Europe over to Australia?
Sounds very challenging for sure. I mean, we have similar challenges in our program, mostly because it's ultra rare as well. You won't find a critical cluster typically with sufficient numbers to recruit, just here in Wisconsin, for instance. And sometimes the kind of the most engaged or most connected patient community is elsewhere. So these are tough questions for sure. So I think we're coming towards the end of our time. I want to pause here before my last question to give a final call to the audience to ask questions. Anyone want to unmute and ask one more question?
I'll just say thanks again, because this was really, really remarkable. So helpful to talk to the four of you really, and get these insights. Just so important. And thanks for taking the time to talk with us.
Yeah, I want to echo that sentiment. It's really insightful to hear from the patients, and I think we don't get to hear from you all enough, even when there are occasional opportunities to do so. I think this Q&A has been really, really insightful for me, and I would love to. I mean, maybe that's a charge to the SCGE team, but more of this kind of engagement I think would be really important. And also as we move forward and have conversations with, say, payers or policymakers or other decision makers, to bring back some of those folks and share some of those insights. And on the insurance topic, it's so frustrating to me to hear how much you have to fight for basic support from the companies that that we all pay for to cover our healthcare. So hats off to you for the fight, and I suppose keep on fighting, even though I wish you didn't have to. But yeah, thank you all.
Manar, would you mind introducing yourself? And
oh yeah, of course. Hi everyone. Manar Zagula. I'm the Director of Public Impact at the Innovative Genomics Institute. My team focuses more on policy issues and access and affordability problems for gene therapies and other CRISPR products.
Awesome, thanks. I'm sure we could get everyone connected. So my final question here for each of you, and I think we'll go in reverse order, is if everyone in this room could remember just one thing from your experience as a patient or caregiver, what would you want it to be? And Stacey, if you're ready, we'll start with you.
If I had one takeaway from this experience of meeting with the researchers, or do you mean from the experience of raising the kid with Usher?
Yeah, the latter.
Okay. I mean, my takeaway is we have a long way to go, but we've also come a really long way. And doing the science communication and explaining this to the world beyond, it is a complex situation. Multisensory loss, ultra rare disorder. What exactly does a clinical trial do or not do? What is a phase 1 versus a phase 2? Is it retaining versus restoring vision? All those kind of complexities are. If I'm just talking to the Chaikofs and other Usher families, we speak the same language. We know everything. Then we put ourselves into talking to you guys, the researchers in the field, and you might have greater experience in the field of gene editing and gene therapy, but not have the Usher specific expertise. There's a lot there. We are so happy to talk to you guys anytime, anywhere. And my son Brendan will as well. Like I said, he just started a new job, so right now not during the workday, but he's very articulate about this and would absolutely be thrilled to talk to you guys any day, anytime, even if it's by email or a Zoom call or something. He would probably criticize some of the things I said and say them slightly differently.
Well, thank you. That's really and great to hear. I'm going to lie and say I have one additional follow-up question, which is if you could influence one priority for future research, what would it be? Because I think you hinted at that in your answer.
I'm just gonna answer the other question first.
Go for it.
So I just want to say thank you all for being here, really hearing our stories. I love being part of these things, but also one of the things I sort of take away from this that's always been really helpful for me is while I really enjoy connecting with other patients with Usher syndrome, what's been really powerful for me is connecting with the researchers, which is why every few years I get really excited to go to the international Usher research conferences. So I get to be in the room with the researchers, and that's partially because I'm in academia field and space now. Very different, but it's been really powerful for me because one of the researchers that we work very closely with has become one of my major academic mentors, cheerleaders, and that has been like so powerful for me as somebody who's doing research to get that support. And so if I could have one takeaway from this, a particular priority influence is really with the research is we need more people doing this work and we need more funding because several years ago when it's all started, no one was doing any work on Usher 1F or really paying attention to us. And so our best hope was stem cells. And now here where we are 10 years later, and so as I really prioritize getting more people do this work. And so what I love seeing is, new PhD students coming on and join these research labs and learning about the research. My hope is to see, this continued mentorship. So the more people we can get involved, the better.
My takeaway, I say, is that while money and advocacy, especially money above all, dictates the speed and the amount of research can be done to develop a cure. One thing that all medical professionals should keep in mind when thinking about rare diseases, they shouldn't think, oh, it affects only one patient or only 50 patients. The thing is, the impact of one person's life is still too many. And one thing they should keep in mind is that when a gene therapy is successfully developed for one disease, even if it's just for one patient, the impact is still huge because that knowledge can then be applied to develop many, many more gene therapies for other diseases. And one great example is that when the antibiotic was very first developed for penicillin, it led to a revolution of creating many more antibiotics for many more other diseases. And so that's how I see it, is that when you're working on one rare disease, you are going to eventually make an impact of millions of people by applying that knowledge to other diseases.
That's a very inspiring answer for us. I also note that we have had a patient scientist in our SCGE team and has done phenomenal work. So that's a really diverse set of experts that we have, and we're trying to broaden that tent as well in the SCGE. Karen, you had a message to share?
Yeah, I think I can speak for everyone. We want to thank you all for lending us your expertise and your time today. I think we all learned a lot from you, and it was all very interesting. The TCDC, we can share people's contact information if anybody wants to have an opportunity to further connect offline, if our panelists would be willing for us to do that. And then also we like to make these recordings available. So we'll send it off to you and you can, see everything and then approve it, and we'll make this recording available for the public to see as well, if you're willing to do that. So that's all I have for my little wrap-up messages. But great job. Thanks, everybody.
Let's give Rachel, Jessica, Stacey, and also Melissa a hand here for sharing their experience and stories, really rich in detail as well as insights, and will certainly influence how we develop our future work. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thanks, everybody, for being here. Bye-bye.